Hello, everybody, and welcome to this EHESO webinar on the European Higher Education Sector Observatory, EHESO. EHESO, it's basically, and we have some people to tell you more about it here today who are behind the observatory, the number crunchers, let's say. But what EHESO does, which I think is quite exciting, is that it brings all data on higher education that has been built up over the last few years, and more into one place. So some of you may have heard of things like the European Tertiary Education Register, graduate survey, the alternative ranking system that the European Commission developed. All this data that was built up has been put into one place, which is called EHESO, and it has itself lots of different functions, and it's used in a way by different types of stakeholders depending on their interests, whether you're a researcher or a policymaker. EHESO is, of course, interested in it because it's, well, what you measure is important, and so EHESO is part of the policy advisory group for EHESO, and we're following its development very closely. I think today, specifically, our guests are going to talk to us about the institutional benchmarking tool that we have, but also I think we'll give you a background on EHESO as a whole. So I would like to thank them for joining us, first of all, and that is Frank Kaiser and Gerhard Federgeil. They both come from two different centres of research for higher education. Let's say that are part of the consortium running EHESO, and that's the Centre for Higher Education in Germany, and the Centre for Higher Education Policy Studies in Twente University in the Netherlands. There are others in the consortium, and perhaps they'll tell us about that. But thank you very much, Franz and Gero, for joining us today. So I think this is really interesting for EHESO members to learn more and also contribute, which I think you're going to also explain. As I mentioned, it's not only existing data, but it's also a matter of collecting new data, and our members can help you in that endeavour. So I'll pass you over to Franz and Gero. I'm not sure which of you are going to start, but again, thank you, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you to EHESO for offering us this opportunity to show you our work, in particular the institutional benchmarking tool, I think, which is really a major and a useful tool for higher education institutions. Throughout this webinar, I will give you a very short introduction to what EHESO is and to the major tools of EHESO. Then Franz will give you an online demonstration of our institutional benchmarking tool. And in the end, finally, I will tell you how your institution could and can fully be in the whole system. So I will share my presentation with you. So what are the EHESO goals? So EHESO is a supporting initiative to the European strategy for university. It's fully funded by the European Commission. And the idea is to integrate, streamline, and enhance data sources on European higher education on one single platform. The major tools and parts and previous projects that are integrated are, on the one hand, ETA, John had already mentioned, the European Tertiary Higher Education Register, and on the other hand, the previous multi-rank, which used to be a ranking, alternative ranking team, but already developed an institutional benchmarking tool. So the idea is to leverage on existing data and tools to develop a set of tools to specific stakeholders and users. This is, on the one hand, to assess the achievement of the EU policy goals, but also to allow scholars, institutional managers, students, and institutions to benchmark their institution against a large set of European higher education institutions and to provide integrated data access for users such as policy analysts and scholars. So, which tools are we developing? What we launched first is a European higher education sector scoreboard. This is an indicator and transparency tool to compare national systems, countries, not in individual institutions. This is mainly addressing policymakers and the EU itself, but also on the national level. And then the second tool that we already launched is what we are introducing to you today, the institutional benchmarking tool. This is the genuine tool addressing universities and higher education institutions to find and compare similar institutions across a set of dimensions and in the indicators. This is what Franz will show you in a minute. Then probably in summer this year, we will launch a newly developed tool for students that will be called the European Student Hub. This is a tool where students can inform about universities to make an informed choice about their university. They can compare institutions according to their own preferences and priorities. We are also publishing some analytical reports and data analysis and have what's called a strategic transformation toolbox. This is a set of links to relevant initiatives, documents, and tools. Everything is in one place on the published as a part of the national policies platform of the EU. We will see it in a moment. And just to give you, information, EHESO is run by an international consortium of organizations. Contractor and coordination is PPMI, a consulting and research company based in Lithuania. Then it's my own institution, CHE, Center for Higher Education, CHEPS, the institution where Franz is located, Center for Higher Education Policy Studies. These were the main partners in the previous year multi-rank project. And on the other hand, we have the main partners from the previous ITER project, the Austrian Institute of Technology and Joanneum Research. So this is roughly speaking the context and the set around EHESO. And now I give the floor to Franz to present the benchmarking tool.
Yes, thank you very much, Geo. I'll just deep dive into the tool and without any further analytical reflections on it. We will come to that, I think, in a minute. We share my screen. There it is. Is it sharing? You see my, okay. Well, this is the EHESO website, which is on the national policy platform of the European Commission. And this is where you get when you click on EHESO and the institutional benchmarking tool. You can see that, and there's some information on general information, what it has and what it does. But you can see here two buttons that are quite important in understanding how the thing works. We had a benchmarking tool at the end of the multi-rank project, and we worked with it, but it proved to be quite difficult to use for policymakers. You had to make a lot of choices and to get results. I mean, that was all fine for data analysts and for people who were very much into the data, but for people who are not on a daily basis working with these data, it was quite a task. So that was one of the reasons why we developed a new version of the benchmarking tool, and that's what we called the at-a-glance view, where the user actually has to make only one choice, which is what is your institution, what is your focal institution, and then the system generates some relevant information for that. The other version is the expert version, where you can tweak your selection of institutions that you want to compare with, but also you can tweak the indicators on which you want to be compared on. And all of that is, of course, in this framework of benchmarking, as it is called, benchmarking tool. And benchmarking is completely different than ranking. That's why we are not talking about ranking anymore. We're not reducing the complexity of a higher education institution into one number, but we want to explore the full complexity and the diversity of the institution and what it does and how it does. And that's why we use the benchmarking approach. And benchmarking is a much more learning-oriented approach. You want to find institutions that are quite similar to your institution. And once you have found them, then you want to explore how your institution is doing within this group of benchmark institutions. What are the elements that you think are important in your performance, and how are the others doing, and who is actually doing better than you? And from going into deep, comparing yourself not only on these numbers, but much more on a more in-depth basis, comparing yourself with these institutions might lead to changes in your own processes that might improve your performance. And so that's the basic idea of benchmarking. It's learning oriented. Having said that, I don't know whether you are familiar with the old U-multi-rank multidimensionality. That's what on the screen also mentioned very briefly. U-multi-rank had 5 dimensions: teaching and learning, research, knowledge transfer, international orientation, and regional engagement. But that was coined, I think, more than 10 years ago. So now we added a dimension, societal challenge. And that is a very broad dimension, as you will see. But we think that on these dimensions, and that's not just because we thought of it, but we had a long consultation with stakeholders on that, that we need to have information on all these dimensions to be able to give a full picture of a higher education institution. Okay, that's all about the talk. Now let's go to the at a glance, which is default selected. You have to click on this little box because it's a Power BI application, but then it pops up, and I expand the view here because that's quite helpful in showing it. Well, of course, first of all, that's the first thing you have to do. You have to select your focal institution. So basically, that's your own institution that you want to compare to others and that you want to learn from the others. And that is quite intuitive. You just add in here. And for simplicity reasons, I just take a Dutch University of Applied Sciences that I know. That's Windesheim University of Applied Sciences. And immediately you get a kind of a profile of the institution to the left-hand side. So this profile gives you at a glance an overview of what this institution is about. Here you see the dimensions that I just mentioned. They are color-coded, and if you hover over, you see the indicators that are on these rays of this sunburst chart. And you also get information. If you go on this actual ray, you get some information on what information is beneath. So that's very nice. I mean, you could even use that and that was done in U-multi-rank as well. You could use it for communication purposes. But we have added something here, and that is that immediately you get an overview of the 15 institutions that are most similar to your institution. Now, most similar, how do you determine that? Well, we used 10 indicators, rather general indicators. For instance, size, we looked at age, we looked at the discipline, whether you're specialized or more comprehensive, whether you have a specific, if you're specialized, what is this discipline that you're specialized in? I mean, we had 10 of these criteria, and we calculated a distant matrix based on that. And based on that, we have 10 institutions that on these indicators are the most similar. An interesting thing is that they don't look all alike, but that's quite normal because that it's not only those 10 indicators that we have selected them for the similarity, but they're all indicators there. So you can see some differences there as well. The differences are in that the length of the rays. So you can see that, for instance, the Swiss University of Applied Sciences of Arts is doing much better in knowledge transfer. And you can see the indicators if you hover over them. But what is also clearly visible is that if you scroll through it, you can see that other institutions actually have a much fuller profile. For instance, here is Polytechnic Institute of Leira in Portugal. They almost have all indicators they have a score on. Whereas, for instance, Windesheim doesn't have any information on the regional engagement. This institution does have at least one indicator there, which is the external research revenues from regional resources. So they actually participate in the survey, and they can be much more present themselves in much more diversified way than institutions that do not participate, like Windesheim or like this Belgium institution. You could also add your own another institution, your neighboring institution, or your partner institution that you want to have in, add it here, and it will be taken also on board in the set of institutions that will be compared. What we then do, and that you can see that in the tabs here, now we have found your peers. Now you can look at comparison, and that we did in a very specific way. We looked within this group of institutions and looked at the median score on each indicator, and then had a analysis where it looked, well, does your institution score above that median or below that median with a certain margin? And so the indicators where your institution scores above the median is presented here on this high tab. And you can see that the same color coding is here again. So your institution, does Windesheim, does relatively well in this research-related indicator, the share of publications in the top 10 cited. And also in this education, teaching and learning indicator, the number of graduates. They have also relatively high level of mature students. But if you look at the low, you can see that they are not very good in international joint publications, well, relative to the rest of the group. And they don't have a large portion of co-publications with industry partners. And you can scroll through. So these are actually on kind of an at a glance view of this is what we are doing quite well, and this is what we are doing. We can improve on that. And basically that's it. What is in this at a glance view. You don't have to do a lot of things, and you just have a lot of information already at your hand. You can have another view, the detailed view, where you have of your institution the scores on all the indicators. A feature that's not yet implemented, that we are struggling with a little bit, is that you can actually download the data as well. And that means that you can use these data and have them as an input in your own visualizations or your own reports. That's something that's going to be available hopefully soon when the technical issues have been solved. So that's the at a glance view. Are there any questions on that one? Feel free to speak up or...
Franz, there is a question by Patricia in the chat. She's asking, can the benchmarking tool differentiate between universities and professional higher education institutions? In what sense can such comparisons help more precise and fair external quality assurance and accreditation?
Well, if you want to use it for as a major input in quality assurance and accreditation, you can use it as a input, but I wouldn't use it as the input. The at a glance view does not give you much leeway in further refining the selection of the institutions. But the thing is that Windesheim is in the University of Applied Science and is a very rather comprehensive institution. And if you look at the institutions that are selected, you can see that this is the Polytechnic, this is also a university college, there's also a Polytechnic, there are Belgians. If you go to the first step, there's a university college, this is University of Applied Science, there's another university. So you can see that through this algorithm, there's already made a selection that groups them together, and which makes the comparison more meaningful than if you would have had only full research universities in this group. So there is already, the algorithm does work. I mean, we tried quite a lot of variations, but this variation makes the distinction quite nicely. Allow me to come back to that question later on when I talk about the expert view.
Yeah, I have a question, Frans, just a clarification. You mentioned how Windesheim hadn't got a score on regional engagement when clearly they must have some regional engagement. So just to clarify, that's because Windesheim hasn't completed a survey or hasn't provided data somehow. Can you just explain that and and how institutions may be able to provide such data?
Yeah. Well, the last question will be answered by Gero at the end.
Okay.
So please hang on till the end of the presentation. Yes, I mean, the tool takes its information from a number of sources. ITER is the main source, and ITER is filled by the European statistical offices. So that kind of information is available for all institutions, and that means that we can provide a profile for all the institutions that are in ITER and have a certain threshold of data there. We also use data from Patent Office, the European Patent Office, and we use data from OpenAlex on research and publications. So we bring together, as you mentioned also in your introduction, we bring together a number of data sources that can provide information for these indicators. Now, the problem is that for a number of teaching and learning, but also on the regional engagement and on the societal challenges, we can't find any consolidated information on that, and that's why we have to rely on the survey for collecting data there. And that is something that Gero will address later on, but that's really one of the messages that comes across here also quite clearly, that if you don't participate, that you're in here. I mean, the information is all coming from official sources, but if you participate in a survey, you have a full profile, and I mean the comparison makes more sense. So that's the reason why, for instance, in Windesheim, there is no information there on regional engagement, although of course they have. And for University of Applied Sciences, this is really an important aspect of their profile. So that will be a big incentive for them to join.
No, that's clear. That's clear, Frans, and later Gero will tell us how our members can help with the institutional survey. And I think that's a good incentive to complete it. However, I would just wonder whether it's important that users understand that when they look at it, because to say that the users could understand that for certain dimensions, if an institution isn't present there at all, it's because the data doesn't exist, not because they've got to know, let's say, presence in the subject area, but just that the data is not available. Yeah. I think that would be fair for users to understand that.
Yeah.
Somehow.
No, it's a good comment. It's a good comment. And we actually in this visualization that the options are a little bit limited, but we will definitely look into it. In our all of U multi-rank, we had two scores, either non-applicable or not available, or so. That's something that is not that well visible in this visualization. That's true. But yeah, I mean, it's a good suggestion to add that information to the user. Okay. If there are no...
There is another question. Sorry, Franz. There's another question by Eva in the chat. She's asking, which organization will maintain and update this tool and its data in the future, or is it available online for a limited time?
The idea is that it will be maintained by the European Commission or by the agency, the executive agency. So the idea is that this will become a tool that is more permanent. So it's clearly not the idea to have it as on a project base like your multi-rank, but on a more permanent basis. And the Commission, of course, will need in the future other partners to consult and to advise them on what indicators to include and how to do that and things like that. But in principle, it will be done by the agency, which means that there will be some continuity there. Okay. Now let's move to the expert view. Again, you have to start the application again. And that gives you also some information on how to use the tool. And what this says is that here you have much more leeway in selecting the group of institutions that you want to compare yourself with. You can read that on your... Go to the website and do some exploring yourself. And this screen is looks... Yeah, this part looks similar, but the rest will look quite different. And the logic is that you have a number of steps. The first step is that, of course, you have to select your own institution. So that's first thing to do. You have your own institution. And I chose a institution, the University of Applied Science. In Finland. Not for a particular reason, but I come to that later on. And so it says, well, here there's one institution selected. And then we can add institutions to it. And we can do that in a number of ways. First of all, we can just use the same logic as we had with the at a glance view. So all the institutions that were selected, so these 15 institutions that were selected in this algorithm are listed here as well. So you can click them and add them to your list. A next possibility is to add institutions that you just want to have in your set anyway. So for instance, if you wanted to have an institution in Belgium, or I mean, if I want to have 20 in it, then it says, well, here it's Enschede and University of Twente, and you can add it to it. So that's an option. Another option, and that's one I'm going to use here, is that you could select a European University Alliance. European University Alliances is an initiative of the European Commission, and they are putting a lot of weight in that. And that's why we have this option in it. We could expand it with the membership of other networks, organizations, but we've limited ourselves to the alliances. well, there are more than, 500-600 institutions already in an alliance. There are around 70 institutions, 70 alliances already out there. And most probably we also will extend this to the networks that have the seal of excellence. So we're trying to be a little bit more flexible there. And here you can select an alliance. And I happen to know that this institution, the Karelia Polytechnic that I selected here, is in Invest. And Invest, that's an alliance, what's their tag? The Competitive University for Sustainable Society, that's their tag. So I selected that, and it says, well, now I have 4 selected. But this is something I'm a little bit puzzled about, because actually they have more members, they have 7 members. But that's not a problem. What we can do is we just, well, I know what the members are. For instance, there is an Italian one, this one. And you see that's now up to 5. There are 2 more to come. There's this peculiar setup, this selection, because you need to open the country first before you see the institution that you want to have in. Now, all 7 members of this alliance are in. So these are the institutions that are in. And you could add other institutions there, but that's something that, or the peer institutions, we already had this group. You could add others, but that's not what we intend to do here. What we now can do, but I'm not going to do this for this presentation, but what we can do is to filter by either institutional characteristics like size or PhD intensity, or by the performance dimension, and so that we are looking for institutions that perform slightly better than our own institution, because that would be the institutions of interest if we are trying to benchmark. I mean, we are interested in those institutions that are doing better than us, because then we can learn from them. And then if you're mostly interested in, for instance, in teaching and learning and improving there, we could select on those institutions that are scoring well on indicators in teaching and learning, and click on that here. We're not going to do that, because if you would do that, you could see that the number of higher education institutions selected will drop very quickly, because we have a very small set. But if you have a larger set, that is something that you really have to have a look at. Good. An interesting thing, I mean, there was this question about research intensity. If you look at, for instance, the PhD status, so is it allowed to award a PhD or not? Karelia is a polytechnic, and in most countries, polytechnics don't have the PhD awarding status. And surprisingly, for me, it is that all other institutions actually do deliver a PhD. So this Karelia is within its network. It's the only institution that doesn't award a PhD, which makes it a special case in this group. Okay, but I want to review the alliance as such, this group of institutions as such, and therefore I go to the next step, and that's the analysis. Now we have identified the peer group, and we are going to analyze it. First of all, you get a presentation on the map. You can see that they are nicely spread across Europe, which is one of the criteria of these alliances. And you have a list of the institutions that are in. But what I'm mainly interested is well, how am I doing? I'm a policymaker at this Karelia Polytechnic, and I'm just interested in how am I doing? What's my position within this network? And Well, maybe as a background, I looked at the mission statement of this institution, and there were 3 keywords in this mission statement that were, to me, quite interesting. That's vitality of the operational environment. So it's kind of a sustainability goal. Strategically networked. That's why we're looking in this alliance. And digital teaching and learning. That's an aspect that we will look into later on. So these are the things that you're interested in, and let's first look at research. And how do we do that? Well, you see here on the top, you see 4 different tabs where you have different ways of visualizing the results. And for research, I thought, well, maybe it's interesting to have a scatter plot. And I'm going to look for I'm looking for research, and I'm looking for publications per academic staff. And on the y-axis, I will look at the share of the publications in top 10 cited publications. And what you see here is that this university has a very relatively low score on the publications per academic staff. This university doesn't have that information, but this university, there's a Bulgarian institute, has even less publications per academic staff. But it's quite interesting to see that within this group, on that indicator, you're scoring quite low. But in the share of publications at 10% top-cited, which is seen as a kind of a quality indicator, this institution scores the highest of this group, which is quite interesting to see, especially also for the others who are in this group. How come that this University of Applied Science with so few publications actually scores so high in this quality indicator on research? Interesting insights that come from just plotting these 2 indicators for this group of institutions. They're also interested in the knowledge transfer, the sustainable region, and so let's go there. And I use a different visualization. That's the bar chart, where you have only 1 indicator. And let's have this indicator again. You get opportunity to select your dimension, and there we can look at, for instance, the co-publications with industry partners. And there, this institution can actually learn from others. And it's quite interesting to see for this institution because it's in a University of Applied Sciences, and you would expect that if they have publications, that the share that they have with industrial partners would be higher than for strictly a research university, but they are lower. So for me, that as a policymaker, that would be an incentive to look at the other institutions. For instance, this is in the University of Reims, this French university, and how are they doing? How did you organize your processes? Or maybe it's because of the subjects that you're researching. How did you organize your processes that you get such a high score? So these bar charts can give you also an idea where you are, but then on a single indicator. The same we can do, for instance, in the regional indicators. And look, for instance, in student internships in the region. And there, one of the features, the consequences of having institutions in it that did not participate in the survey. This indicator is based on a survey information, and you can see that only 2 of these 7 actually completed the survey. So the comparison becomes a little bit less meaningful, though it's interesting to see that most of the internships are in the region, which is not that big a surprise. But for the Spanish university, it's maybe the regions are much bigger than for the Finnish institution, but that might be one of the reasons. But you can have a look at it then and compare to the Spanish institution. And a final aspect I want to show, and therefore I go to the scatter plot again, is on the new dimension, the societal challenges. And we had that, was a digital investment in teaching and learning. And on the other axis, we look at the share of graduates in ICT. And interesting here is that, again, the problem is with the survey-based information, especially this in digital investment. But the interesting thing here is that they score quite high on this one. And in their mission statement, they were saying, well, they were very much interested in digital teaching and learning. So that actually confirms that picture, that they are investing in it and that they are doing quite well on this dimension within this group, although the number of institutions that don't have information is quite large. Okay, that is, I mean, and you also have some other views. You have the time series view. In internships, it's only 1 year, but if you go, for instance, for this publication thing, publications per staff, where is it? You can see that you get some kind of a trend that for most of the institutions, you can see an upward trend, except for this bottom one. And your own institution, and they only have information for 2 years. So this is a time series, and this matrix gives you an opportunity to list a number of indicators and then have some and have the information of the rest of the group also in a different way. Again, here's the download function, and again, the technical issue is the same as with the at a glance view. That's not yet available. But the information that we have is both on the data, but also on the metadata, so that you have the definition and the proper indicator name and where it actually comes from, this information. That's interesting here because you can see here, this is, for instance, from the National Statistical Institute, based on the ETA database. So here you can see where it comes from. Okay. Well, that's basically the benchmarking tool. And I'll stop sharing. Are there at this point any questions?
Okay, Mathilde, you got some in the chat, do you?
Yeah, exactly. In the Q&A function, there's a question from Nuno from Portugal. He's asking about the tool, the European Student Hub. Question number 1, what can we expect from this tool? What is the metadata that will support the tool? And what about AI used in the tool?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to answer this question after my next presentation. So I will come to the link of the data sources and the tools. Maybe if you can wait for another 5 minutes, then you will get your answer.
Are there any questions related to the institutional benchmarking?
Mine was a very short question and just an observation, which was that institution from Finland, University of Applied Sciences, that you used to benchmark Karalia, it's correctly in the, let's say, the code said Karalia University of Applied Sciences, but it also was called Karalia Polytechnic. And I'd just like to know why does it have 2 different names?
They have different names?
Well, it had a name, yeah, on the, let's say, one part of the tool and a different name on the other part. It's called Polytechnic and US Applied Sciences. And, I just wondered why that was the case. I know it's the same one. There aren't 2.
Yeah. Well, the names, we have a small issue with that because we have the national name, an English translation of the name, and sometimes because the names come from the ORCRAC database, which is a satellite database where all the institutions are in. And that is sometimes not completely aligned with our names, or we are not aligned with our Greg. So that's something that we are looking into, because we had some since the launch, we had some questions about the naming. But yeah, I mean, we work with an identifier, of course, which is a unique identifier, and the name then goes to the identifier. And sometimes you have different fields for different types of names, and then you get these confusing things. Yeah.
And if somebody does see such a thing, is there a way they're able to correct it? Can they write an email or
Yeah.
to you or something and just
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
that's clear. I mean, if there are any errors in this, both in the, as you say, in the naming, but also in the information that is presented, and you think that something is not correct, then you can write an email, and we will respond. And if it's really an error, we will change the data. If it's something, and the naming, that's another thing that we can change relatively quickly. But there we also have to be very careful in the consistency of all the sources that we're using. So that's something, and otherwise changes will also be implemented then in a new version of the tool.
Okay. This question in the chat, I'm just seeing it now from Romanus about which way the data was collected. Could universities provide it, or do you work with national data agencies? I think you have explained it already. I mean, I can just give my interpretation and I'm incorrect, Frans, and you can correct me. But I think, Romanus, the way it's done is two ways. One is using data sets that exist, that have been collected over the years, and it can be used. And the second is the institutional survey, which is where universities provide the data.
Exactly.
But is there
If this is the last question, then we may continue, because this is just my next slide, showing more details on the data, different data sources.
Excellent. Okay, let's do that.
Then I will share. Yeah, we already touched this question on data source and also the missing data. So how are the data collected? So the tools, all the tools are based on a multiple set of data. As Frans said, basic is the data from the national statistical offices, the previous what we call the ETA data. Then in addition, we use data from bibliometric and patent databases. On mobility, we use Erasmus Plus data. We also added some external data sources, like on the country level, the Academic Freedom Index, or also some data from quality assurance. And we have two own surveys. One is the institutional survey. I will come on that in a little bit more detail. And we also have a student survey that will be a core element of the upcoming student tool. So we had the question in this on the student hub. As we said, we are currently in the stage of programming it. That will be also a similar tool like the institutional benchmarking tool. There will be a large one difference. While the institutional benchmarking tool starts with similarities among institutions, the student tool will be based on individual preferences and priorities of the user. If a student he wants to make a bachelor, wants to go to a large university, to a private and public, and these things, and then we will have a set of indicators on those institutions that match the criteria, and one of the I think important data source will there be a student survey, the student's assessment on their learning experience. So, but these are in general the data from which we feed the tools, and all of these sources are also relevant except the student survey data for the institutional benchmarking tool. So on the institutional benchmarking tool, you have seen that on some institutions had a number of missings for some indicators, and about 1/3 of the indicators of the benchmarking tool are based on our own institutional survey. This concerns a number of indicators particularly on some dimensions, the societal challenges, regional data. They are currently not available from national statistical offices, but also some indicators on emerging issues like sustainability, micro-credentials are not yet covered by statistical offices, so we have to collect those data directly institutions. This means when your institution wants to have a full portfolio of indicators in the benchmarking tool, you should participate in our survey. Our next survey will start in November this year. The data will be updated biannually, and the registration for participation is already open. This is the link, but we will share the slides so that you have the link, but I can also put it in the chat afterwards. So this is why we would like to or would be happy if we can stimulate you and as many as possible members of your RASHI to participate in the data to get a full portfolio of their indicators in the benchmarking tool. I think it's more useful than the benchmarking tool for the institution themselves, but of course, the benefit of the whole tool increases with a better coverage of data. Yeah, so are there any additional questions on this, on the origin of the data and how to get in and how to provide the missing data?
Well, just for me, in terms of the timing, November is the start of the next survey. So
Yes.
between now and November, can institutions do anything?
Well, they can register.
Yes.
And then in maybe late October, early November, the survey will start. Before the start, we will contact institutions again. We will also organize then a series of webinars on the data collection. So a kind of introduction and learning.
Filling in this survey, you have a link there to the survey. Filling that in now doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it has the update, the revised questionnaire is not yet programmed, so at the moment it doesn't make sense to.
So you wouldn't advise us institutions to complete anything until. Well,
institutions that are interested in participation, what we could do, we could send them the version of the previous questionnaire so that they already get an idea which kind of data we are collecting. Okay. Still, there may be some revisions of the questionnaire, but I think this gives a basic idea on the kind and also the extent of data we are.
Well, yeah, if it's not available on the website, if you could send it to us, and then we can also distribute it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we can send a PDF version of the questionnaire.
Yes, please.
But be aware that the version that you see that you get is the maximum one. I mean, what we did is that for all the institutions that we have data on, for instance, students or graduates, that these questions are not. You don't need to fill that in because that's something that is already there in the EHESO or in the ETAG database, and that comes from national statistical agencies. So, and that's in a new version even more the case, that we want to limit the questions to those things that actually are nowhere else available. And there is also some new issues that have arisen since the previous version. So there will be also a few more questions, but we really are aware of the administrative burden of these kind of things. So we want to keep that to a minimum.
Yeah, that's a good point indeed, Frank. So the PDF version will include a number of questions that individual institutions will not see in the real online survey, because those data for these countries and these institutions can be drawn are already available from ETA, so we don't have to ask for this in the survey.
Sure. Well, I mean, if that's possible at all to indicate which ones they won't need to be concerned with. Okay. Well, thank you from my side. That's all clear, and we will do our best to promote this survey for you, especially after the summer, leading up to the new launch date.
There are two final questions before we close. The first one is, what about AI with a student survey, for example, with a social network such as LinkedIn?
Yeah, at the moment, the data or the indicators from this for the student tool, they are based on on our own student survey. It's in our line for the next year also to explore in which way we can include AI sources or AI analysis on the data. But in the beginning, we do this an extension of this step by step, and this is more for the midterm.
Thank you. And another question, Erlend is asking, is the code for combining and presenting data, including the algorithm for finding similar institutions, publicly available, for example, through a public repository or documentation?
Yes. Soon. We have a handbook on that, indicators, and we have actually finished this week. And we'll put this preliminary version on the web, so it will be available on the NPP. And then once it's finally approved by the Commission, which is, I don't know whether you have worked with the Commission, but it can be a hassle. But once it's been approved, then it will be published as well. So yes, these handbooks we have now. We have the EHESO handbook that's available. We have the handbook on the scoreboard, the national level. The institutional benchmarking tool will be available soon, hopefully this week. Which is today. The handbook on the students that will come, I think within a few. Well, it will be available around summer. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there was another question indicating that obviously Eurostat is not recognizing the Dutch UAS as a research institution. So we have to say all our ways to identify similar institutions are based on empirical data, on empirical indicators. We do not rely on official country-wise classifications, for example, of universities versus Universities of Applied Science, because this was also one of the lessons we learned already in UMultiRank, that the boundaries between the two sectors, both in terms of profile but also in performance, are more and more blurring. So we think it makes more sense to rely on indicators of the profile, PhD awarding, number of publications, than on this official status. For example, in Germany, we have some universities of applied science that are more international than most of the universities. So this is an aspect where we see that the boundaries between the two are more and more blurring.
Okay, well, she says that's reassuring. So, okay, if there are no other questions, we are almost at the hour, and I would just like to thank you both for this. I think the members and also others, because this is an open webinar, would just say to go onto the EHESO website and have a look, not just at the institutional tool, but all the other things that are available there. It's extremely interesting, not only for researchers, but for others as well. I'm certainly, although I knew of its existence, you've inspired me to have a go, spend some time this afternoon having a look at playing around a bit. So thank you very much. And yeah, just keep looking out for the survey coming up in the autumn. And if we have any other questions that come after this webinar, we'll forward them on to you. Please, Frans and Gerda. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, both Mathilde and John, for offering us this opportunity to show our tools. And of course, most of all, thank you for all the participants for joining and for your interest in EHESO.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.